Her fingers trembled over the keys, and the hall was filled with that special silence that precedes either triumph or disaster. Charlotte knew the next few minutes would determine her entire future. There were people in the hall who could destroy or build a career with a single word. And now they were expecting a miracle from her. Good day, friends. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like. The story begins 6 months earlier. Rain pounded the windows of the Pemberton mansion in Hampstead, creating a monotonous rhythm as Charlotte Wilson polished the silver candlesticks in the large drawing room for the 3rd hour in a row. She was 22 years old, and every day of her life in this house was scheduled down to the minute, from dawn until late at night. Charlotte arrived at the Pemberton home a year ago from a small town in Yorkshire, where her father worked as a schoolteacher and her mother was a housewife. The family was not wealthy, but educated. Her father taught her to read music and play the piano, and her mother instilled in her good manners and dignity. When her father lost his job due to school cutbacks and her mother fell ill, Charlotte had to find a way to support the family. An advertisement seeking a maid for the family of a wealthy London banker seemed like a lifesaver. Charles Pemberton, a 45-year-old widower and owner of one of the most successful private banks in the city, needed a reliable servant for his country mansion. The salary was generous, enough to support his parents, and even put some money aside for the future. The first months of work passed relatively calmly. Mr. Pemberton rarely visited the country house, preferring his London residence. Charlotte lived in a small but cozy room on the 2nd floor, next to the other servants' quarters. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hartwell, a woman of about 50 with a stern face but a kind heart, quickly appreciated the new servant's hard work and education. "Girl, you're not like ordinary servants," she said one evening as they prepared for their master's arrival. "It's clear you've had a good upbringing. Just be careful not to stand out too much. Masters don't like servants who are overly educated." Charlotte took the advice to heart, but she couldn't follow it entirely. When no one was home, she often went into the large living room, where a beautiful Steinway grand piano stood. The instrument was perfectly tuned, its glossy surface reflecting the light from the crystal chandelier. Charlotte couldn't resist. She carefully lifted the lid and quietly played melodies she remembered from childhood. Music was her secret passion. As a child, she dreamed of becoming a pianist and performing in concert halls. But life had other plans. Now, these brief moments alone with the piano were her only solace in the monotony of a servant's life. Everything changed that November evening when Mr. Pemberton unexpectedly arrived at the country house with a group of business associates. Charlotte was just finishing playing a Chopin nocturne when she heard the sound of carriages approaching. She slammed the piano lid shut and hurried to the back door. But it was too late. "Who was playing?" Mr. Pemberton's loud bass voice echoed throughout the house. "Mrs. Hartwell!" The housekeeper, pale, hurried into the living room, followed by Charlotte, her eyes downcast. Several men in expensive coats, still wearing their gloves and hats, stood in the living room. "Sir," Mrs. Hartwell began, "I can explain—" "There's nothing to explain," Pemberton interrupted, looking intently at Charlotte. "I asked who played. Could one of the maids really play the piano?" Charlotte looked up. Mr. Pemberton was a tall man, with noble features and dark hair graying at the temples. His gray eyes studied her with curiosity, not without a certain interest. "It was me, sir," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have—" "Quiet," Pemberton raised his hand. "Where did you learn to play like that?"
"My father was a music teacher, sir. He taught me."
The men in the living room exchanged glances. One of them, a plump gentleman with a red mustache, chuckled. "Charles, you have a very talented servant. You could hear the kind of playing you hear in the finest salons in London." Pemberton remained silent, continuing to study Charlotte. Finally, he nodded. "Good. Mrs. Hartwell, have dinner prepared. And you," he turned to Charlotte, "will have guests tomorrow evening. You'll play for them." Charlotte's heart began to beat faster. It wasn't a request. It was an order. But deep down she felt a strange thrill. Finally, she would be able to demonstrate her skills. The next day flew by in preparations. The finest chefs from London arrived. Florists decorated the rooms with fresh flowers, and servants polished the parquet floors in crystal until they shone. Mrs. Hartwell fussed more than usual, glancing anxiously at Charlotte every now and then.
"Girl, do you realize that the cream of London society will be here tonight?"
she whispered as they set out glasses in the dining room.
"Lord Ashton, Viscount Morland, the banker Rothschild. If you disgrace yourself, Mr. Pemberton will throw us both out without references."
Charlotte nodded, trying to appear calm, though inside she was seething with nerves. She'd spent the day mentally replaying various melodies, choosing the one that would best suit this evening. By 7 o'clock in the evening, guests began to arrive. Charlotte, dressed in her best dark blue maid's uniform, with a crisp white apron and her hair neatly pulled back, stood by the wall of the living room and watched the incoming guests. The men wore impeccable tailcoats, their patent leather shoes creaking on the parquet floor. The women resembled exotic birds in their velvet and silk dresses of emerald, burgundy, and navy blue. Diamonds and pearls shimmered in the chandeliers, and the air was filled with the aromas of expensive perfumes and cigars. Lady Catherine Morland, the Viscount's wife, looked particularly elegant in an ivory gown with a plunging neckline. Her chestnut hair was styled in an elaborate updo with pearl pins. She gracefully held an ostrich feather fan, occasionally coquettishly fanning herself. Lord James Ashton, a man of about 40 with aristocratic features and cold blue eyes, was discussing some financial matters with his host. His young wife, Lady Elizabeth, a girl of about 20 with golden curls and a childish face, was looking around the living room with boredom. The aged banker, Nathan Rothschild, patriarch of the famous financial dynasty, sat in a chair by the fireplace, leaning on a gold-headed cane. His gray beard and piercing dark eyes gave him the appearance of a sage who had seen much in this life. The conversation was conducted in French and English, with the guests discussing politics, theater, and the latest news from continental Europe. Charlotte understood most of the conversation. Her father had taught her not only music, but also languages. She heard Lord Ashton recount his recent trip to Vienna, where he met with Austrian government officials to discuss new trade agreements. Lady Catherine shared her impressions of the latest opera at Covent Garden, and Mr. Rothschild expressed his opinion on the prospects for railway construction in America. The dinner was celebrated in a solemn atmosphere. Charlotte, along with the other servants, served the dishes, trying to remain discreet. The menu included Whitstable oysters, roast venison with juniper, lobster, puddings, and exquisite French cheeses. The wine flowed freely: Bordeaux, champagne, and port. After dinner, the guests retired to the drawing room for coffee and liqueurs. It was then that Mr. Pemberton signaled to Charlotte. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, gently raising his glass of cognac, "we have a special treat tonight. My maid plays the piano quite interestingly. I think you'll appreciate it." A light chuckle rippled through the drawing room. Lady Elizabeth snickered into her handkerchief, and Lord Ashton raised an eyebrow with an ironic smile. "Charles," he said, "are we really going to listen to a maid banging away at the keys? It's rather original." "Let's hear what the girl can do," Banker Rothschild added with interest. "It might be funny." All eyes turned to Charlotte. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. Slowly, trying to maintain her dignity, she approached the piano. The instrument stood in the center of the living room, its polished surface reflecting the light from the chandelier and candles. Charlotte sat down on the bench, adjusted her skirt, and rested her hands on the keys. A second of silence. Then her fingers touched the keys, and the melody began to flow. She began with a Chopin nocturne, the very same one she'd been playing the day before when her host caught her. The music flowed softly, tenderly, every note measured and precise. Silence reigned in the living room, only the crackling of logs in the fireplace and the soft rustle of dresses interrupting the magical sounds. But Charlotte didn't stop at one piece. Smoothly, without pause, she moved on to another, a Strauss waltz, which had recently become popular in London salons. Her performance was virtuoso. She played not just with technique, but with soul, pouring her feelings and emotions into every note. Gradually, the guests' expressions changed. Irony and condescension gave way to surprise, and then to admiration. Lady Catherine stopped fanning herself and listened, her mouth slightly open. Lord Ashton put down his glass and watched the girl's fingers intently. Even old Rothschild leaned forward in his chair. Charlotte felt the change in the atmosphere. Her fear dissolved, giving way to the pure pleasure of the performance. She forgot that she was a servant, that the most powerful people in London sat before her. Now there was only her, the piano, and the music. The final chords were her own improvisation on the theme of a folk ballad sung by her mother. The melody was simple, yet poignant, full of both melancholy and hope. As the last sounds faded into the air, complete silence fell over the living room. Charlotte sat with her arms at her sides, not daring to look up. Mr. Rothschild was the first to stir. He began clapping his hands slowly, and a moment later, the others joined in. The applause thundered through the living room for several minutes. "Amazing!" exclaimed Lady Catherine. "Charles, where did you find such a treasure?" "I have never heard anything like it, even in the best concert halls," Lord Ashton added, and there was not a drop of the previous irony in his voice. Mr. Pemberton looked pleased, but Charlotte saw something else in his gaze, something that made her nervous. "Charlotte," he said, "come here to me." She rose from the bench and approached the master. He placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that seemed too familiar to her for a master-servant relationship. "Gentlemen and ladies," Pemberton announced, "may I present to you Miss Charlotte Wilson. As you can see, her talent is truly exceptional." The guests surrounded Charlotte, peppering her with questions. Where did she study? Who did she teach? Was she planning a professional career? Charlotte answered modestly and briefly, feeling uneasy under the attention. Lady Elizabeth, who had seemed bored until then, came closer and took Charlotte's hand. "My dear, you have an amazing technique," she said in her clear voice. "Tell me, do you know Beethoven's new sonata? The one that was recently published in Vienna?"
I'm afraid not, my lady, Charlotte replied. I don't have access to new sheet music. What a pity! Lady Elizabeth turned to Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton, you simply must provide this girl with access to the best works. Such talent should not be buried.
Of course, Lady Elizabeth, the host agreed. I'll think about it. The evening continued for several more hours. Guests asked Charlotte to play more, and she performed several pieces by Mozart and Bach. With each melody, her confidence grew, and the guests' admiration intensified. When the guests finally departed, silence reigned in the house. The servants cleared the dishes and tidied the rooms. Charlotte helped them, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She still felt the impact of what had happened. For the first time in her life, her talent was being appreciated by people who understood music. "Charlotte," Mr. Pemberton called out to her, "come into my office." Pemberton's office was on the ground floor and overlooked the garden. The room was furnished in a masculine style: dark oak furniture, leather chairs, and walls hung with portraits of ancestors and paintings of hunting scenes. Behind the massive desk were shelves filled with books on finance, history, and philosophy. Pemberton poured himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter and invited Charlotte to sit in the chair opposite the table. "You created quite a sensation this evening," he began, sipping his whiskey. "My guests were delighted. Lord Ashton even said he'd like to invite you to perform at his house." Charlotte was silent, not knowing what to answer. "I think," Pemberton continued, "that it would be a waste to keep such talent in the shadows. Perhaps we should consider new opportunities for you."
What do you mean, sir?
Charlotte asked quietly. Pemberton stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the night garden. "You see, there's always a demand for entertainment in London society. Rich people are willing to pay big money for exclusive performances in their homes. You could earn much more than you currently earn as a servant." Charlotte's heart began to beat faster. Was he really offering her a career in music? "Of course," he continued, still looking out the window. "You'll need a patron, someone who will introduce you to the right circles, provide you with contacts, take care of your image." He turned to face her, and there was something in his gaze that made Charlotte feel uneasy. "I could become such a patron," he said quietly. "Naturally, this would require certain changes in our relationship." Charlotte realized what he was getting at, and her cheeks flushed. She rose from her chair. "Sir, I thank you for the offer, but—" "Don't rush your answer," Pemberton interrupted. "Think about it. You have a talent that can open doors to a world you could only dream of before. But you'll never get there alone. And I can help you." He came closer, and Charlotte could smell his cologne and whiskey. "Of course, I won't force you," he continued. "The decision is yours. But remember, opportunities like these don't come around often." Charlotte looked down. "May I think about it, sir?" "Of course. Think as long as you need, but not too long. There are other talented girls in the world." He returned to his desk, signaling the end of the conversation. Charlotte left the office on shaky legs and went up to her room. She lay awake all night, pondering the owner's offer. On the one hand, it was an opportunity to realize her dream, to pursue music professionally, perform before a distinguished audience, and earn money with her talent. On the other hand, Pemberton's asking price was too high. She thought about her parents, about how proud her father would be if he knew of her success. But what would he say if he knew how she achieved it. The next few days passed in a tense atmosphere. Pemberton acted as usual, but Charlotte felt his gaze on her when he thought she wasn't looking. Mrs. Hartwell noticed her state and repeatedly asked what was wrong, but Charlotte replied that she was simply tired. Everything changed when an unexpected guest arrived at the house. He was a young man of about 25, tall and slender, with dark, curly hair and lively brown eyes. He introduced himself as Thomas Harrington, Mr. Pemberton's nephew and an aspiring composer. Thomas came from Paris, where he studied composition at the conservatory. He was the complete opposite of his uncle, open, cheerful, and more passionate about music than money. Over dinner, he talked about the Parisian musical scene, the new works he'd heard, and the composers he'd met. "Uncle Charles," he said, waving his fork, "you can't imagine the atmosphere in Paris right now. Music is everywhere, in the theaters, in the salons, on the streets. Something completely new is being born there. I can feel it." Pemberton listened with the patient smile of a man who had long since reconciled himself to his relative's eccentricities. "This is all very interesting, Thomas, but don't forget that music is a wonderful hobby, not a way to make a living." "Oh, but that's not true," Thomas objected. "I know plenty of composers and performers who make a wonderful living from their art. The main thing is talent and persistence." Charlotte listened to this conversation while serving the dishes and felt hope rise in her chest. Here was a man who understood music as well as she did. After dinner, Thomas walked into the living room and saw the piano. "Oh, what a beautiful instrument!" he exclaimed. "Uncle, do you play?" "No," Pemberton replied, "but I have a maid who plays quite well. Would you like to hear her?" Thomas perked up. "Of course! It's always interesting to hear local talent." Pemberton called Charlotte over and asked her to play something for his guest. The girl sat down at the piano and performed one of Mozart's sonatas. Thomas's reaction was immediate. He listened with his mouth open, and when the music ended, he jumped up and started clapping. "This is amazing!" he exclaimed. "Where did you study? Who did you take lessons from?" Charlotte told him her story, and Thomas listened with growing amazement. "It's incredible," he muttered. "Such technique, such musicality, and all this self-taught? It's simply a miracle." He turned to his uncle. "Charles, do you realize what a treasure you have in your house? This girl could play in the best concert halls in Europe." Pemberton shrugged. "Perhaps, but she's just a servant from the provinces." "Just?" Thomas was indignant. "Talent knows no social boundaries. Mozart was from a simple family, and Beethoven—" "Thomas," his uncle interrupted, "don't get carried away. The girl plays well, but there's a huge gap between playing music at home and a professional career." But Thomas didn't let up. He spent the rest of the day asking Charlotte about her musical background, what pieces she knew, and which composers she liked best. He even asked her to play a duet. He sat at the piano and played a complex part, and she joined in. Their playing was remarkably harmonious, as if they had been playing together for years. Thomas improvised, and Charlotte easily picked up his melodic lines and developed them. The music flowed naturally and freely, without constraint or tension. "You have a wonderful sense of ensemble," Thomas said when they finished, "and an excellent ear. You easily pick up any key, any rhythm." That evening, when the house was quiet, Thomas knocked on the door of Charlotte's room. "Sorry for the late visit," he said when she opened the door, "but I couldn't sleep without talking to you." They went down to the kitchen, where they could talk without fear of being overheard. "Charlotte," Thomas began,
I have something important to tell you. Your talent is a true gift. It would be a sin to bury it." "But what can I do?" she asked quietly. "I'm just a servant. I don't have the money for tuition. I don't have the connections." "What if you had the opportunity?" Thomas interrupted. "What if someone could help you get a real musical education, introduce you to the right people?" Charlotte remembered her conversation with Mr. Pemberton and blushed. "Your uncle has already made me a similar offer," she said quietly. Thomas frowned. "What exactly did he propose?"
Charlotte told him about her conversation with Pemberton, without going into detail but giving the gist of it. Thomas's face grew increasingly gloomy. "I thought so," he said finally. "Uncle Charles was always pragmatic in his dealings with women. But what he's offering you isn't patronage. It's something else entirely." "Then what should I do?" Charlotte asked. "Stay a servant for the rest of my life?" Thomas paused, thinking about something. "What if there was another way?" he said finally. "An honest way, without compromise." "Which?" "There's a conservatory in Paris that accepts students regardless of their background. The key is talent and the ability to pay tuition. And the fees aren't that high, especially if you get a scholarship." Charlotte's eyes lit up. "But how can I get in? I have no educational documents, no recommendations." "I can write the recommendation myself," Thomas said. "My teacher, Professor Dumont, will listen to my opinion. And as for the money, I have some savings. I could help with the initial expenses." Charlotte's heart started beating faster. "But why do you want to help me? You barely know me." Thomas smiled. "Because I believe in your talent, and because every true musician deserves a chance to prove themselves." They talked until dawn, discussing the details of a possible plan. Thomas talked about life in Paris, the conservatory, and how his studies were going. Charlotte listened, mesmerized. For the first time in her life, a real opportunity to realize her dream was opening up before her. "But there's one condition," Thomas said. "You must be prepared for hard work. Studying at the conservatory isn't a game. You'll need total dedication, many hours of daily practice, studying theory, the history of music." "I'm ready," Charlotte said firmly. "I'm ready for anything." The next day, Thomas sent a letter to his teacher in Paris, describing Charlotte's talent and asking him to consider her admission. Charlotte, meanwhile, began preparing for the most important decision of her life. She understood that accepting Thomas's proposal would mean a complete break with her former life. She would have to leave England, her parents, and a strange country with an unfamiliar language. But the alternative, remaining a servant or accepting Mr. Pemberton's unacceptable offer, seemed even worse. Meanwhile, Pemberton grew increasingly insistent. He repeatedly brought up his proposal, hinting that his patience was not limitless. "Charlotte," he said one evening, "I hope you haven't forgotten our conversation. I've received several invitations for you. Very influential people want to hear you play in their homes." "I'm still thinking, sir," she replied. "Time is money, my dear. While you're thinking, others are acting. Don't miss your chance." A letter from Paris arrived 2 weeks later. Professor Dumont agreed to audition Charlotte if she could come to Paris. He made no guarantees, but promised a fair consideration of her candidacy. "That's all we need," Thomas said, showing the letter to Charlotte. "An honest opportunity to showcase your talent." They agreed to leave within a week. Thomas handled all the arrangements, tickets, documents, and hotel reservations in Paris. Charlotte only had to gather her few belongings and muster the courage to speak with Mr. Pemberton. This conversation turned out to be even more difficult than she expected. "You want to leave?" Pemberton didn't hide his surprise and irritation. "With my nephew? To Paris?" "Yes, sir. I have the opportunity to enter the conservatory." "The conservatory?" Pemberton laughed, but his laugh was evil. "Charlotte, have you lost your mind? You realize your chances of getting in are practically zero. And even if you do, what then? Do you think the world is waiting for another pianist from the English provinces?" "I must try, sir." Pemberton came closer to her, his face darkening. "And my nephew? What did he promise you for this adventure? Do you really think a young aristocrat would marry a servant?" Charlotte's cheeks flushed. "This isn't about marriage, sir. This is about music, about my future." "About your future?" Pemberton grabbed her hand. "I'm offering you a real future. Money, social status, the opportunity to play for the most powerful people in England. And you're choosing some pipe dreams." "Let me go," Charlotte said firmly. Pemberton let go of her hand, but his eyes blazed with anger. "Fine. If you want to ruin your life so badly, that's your business. But remember, when you return with shattered dreams and empty pockets, the doors of this house will be closed to you. And not only this house, I'll make sure no self-respecting family in England will hire you." Charlotte straightened up. "I understand, sir, and I accept this risk." She turned and walked out of the office, feeling her knees tremble. There was no turning back now. The next day, Charlotte and Thomas left the Pemberton estate. Mrs. Hartwell wept as she saw the girl off, and the other servants looked at her with a mixture of admiration and regret. Few people would dare to make such a radical change in their lives. The journey to Paris took 2 days. They traveled by train to Dover, then crossed the English Channel, and then took another train to the French capital. This was Charlotte's first trip outside England, and everything seemed wonderful and new to her. Paris greeted them with noise, bustle, and astonishing beauty. Wide boulevards, elegant buildings, an endless stream of carriages and pedestrians, all of this captivated the provincial girl. Thomas put Charlotte up in a small but clean hotel in the Latin Quarter, not far from the conservatory. Her room was tiny, barely big enough for a bed, a table, and a chair, but the window overlooked a narrow, cobbled street lined with cafes and bookshops. "You have an audition tomorrow," Thomas said, leaving her to get settled. "Professor Dumont is expecting us at the conservatory at 10 in the morning. Try to get some sleep and don't worry too much." But it was impossible not to be nervous. Charlotte spent a sleepless night mentally rehearsing the pieces she planned to perform at the audition. She chose 3 pieces in different styles, Bach, Chopin, and Liszt, to showcase the different sides of her skill. In the morning, Thomas escorted her to the conservatory. The building was imposing, an old mansion with tall windows and bas-reliefs on the facade. Inside, the corridors were filled with students carrying music folders and instruments. Sounds were everywhere. Someone playing scales on the violin, someone singing vocalizes, and from a distant room came the sounds of an orchestral rehearsal. Professor Henri Dumont turned out to be an elderly man of about 60, with a gray beard and piercing eyes. He met them in his office, where a beautiful Pleyel grand piano stood. "So this is the English girl you wrote to me about, Monsignor Harrington," he said, casting an appraising glance at Charlotte. Yes, Professor. Allow me to introduce Miss Charlotte Wilson. Dumont nodded. Very well. Miss Wilson, I hope you understand that admission to our conservatory is a very serious matter. We have very high standards and fierce competition. Yes, Professor, Charlotte answered. Good. Then show me what you're capable of. Charlotte sat down at the piano and began with Bach's Prelude and Fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier. It was a technical piece, demanding precision and clarity. She played with concentration, trying to highlight every vocal line of the fugue. The professor listened silently, occasionally making notes in his notebook. When she finished, he simply nodded. Go on. The next piece was Chopin's Nocturne, the one that started it all at the Pemberton House. Here, Charlotte could showcase her lyrical side, her ability to convey emotion through music. She played with soul, pouring her feelings and emotions into every note. An expression of interest appeared on the professor's face, but he remained silent. The final piece was Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, a virtuoso piece full of technical challenges. Charlotte knew it was a risky choice. The piece required brilliant technique, which she possessed, albeit not perfect. But she wanted to demonstrate her courage and ambition. She played with fire and passion, her fingers flying across the keys, producing cascades of sound. She made a few minor errors in complex passages, but the overall impression was powerful. When the final chords faded, silence fell over the room. Professor Dumont put his notebook aside and looked at Charlotte for a long moment. Interesting, he said finally. Very interesting. He stood up and walked around the office. You have good technique, though not flawless. Your musicality is undeniable. But most importantly, you have something that can't be learned in school. You play with soul. Charlotte's heart began to beat faster. However, the professor continued, you have serious gaps in your education. Music theory, harmony, history. You'll have to learn all of this from scratch. It won't be easy. I'm ready to work, Professor, Charlotte said. Dumont smiled. I see that. Very well, Miss Wilson. I'm ready to accept you into my class. But on one condition. The first year will be probationary. If you don't show sufficient progress, you'll have to leave the conservatory. Charlotte could hardly hold back tears of joy. Thank you, Professor. I won't let you down. We'll see, Dumont said dryly. Classes start in a week. During that time, you'll need to sort out all the organizational matters, payment, documents, and accommodations. When they left the conservatory, Charlotte felt like she was in a fairy tale. Her dream was coming true. Congratulations, Thomas said, hugging her. I knew you could do it. The next week was spent preparing. Thomas helped with the paperwork and made the down payment for her tuition. He also helped Charlotte find permanent housing, a small attic room in the home of Madame Morel, an elderly widow who rented rooms to conservatory students. Madame Morel proved to be a kind, albeit strict, woman. She established strict rules. No men in the rooms after 9 o'clock, silence after 10, and payment in advance at the beginning of each month. But she also fed her guests simple but satisfying meals and treated them almost like a mother. So you'll be studying with Professor Dumont? She said, showing Charlotte the room. Very well. He's a strict but fair teacher. I've had his students stay with me before. All of them have been successful. The room was tiny but cozy. Beneath the sloping roof stood a narrow bed, a table, a chair, and a small closet. The window overlooked a courtyard where an old chestnut tree grew. In the corner stood a small piano, not the best, but sufficient for daily practice. The first day of classes at the conservatory was a true revelation for Charlotte. For the first time, she found herself surrounded by people who lived music as passionately as she did. Students of different ages and nationalities were united by a single love: art. Her group consisted of 8 people, 5 girls and 3 boys. Among them were Marie Dubois, the daughter of a Parisian lawyer who had been playing since childhood; Jean-Paul Leroy, the son of a provincial organist who dreamed of becoming a concert pianist; Isabella Rossi from Italy, who possessed an astonishing technique; and Karl Müller from Germany, serious and methodical like all Germans. The curriculum was intensive. 4 hours of piano lessons daily, plus lectures on music theory, harmony, music history, and music analysis. Once a week, there was chamber music, where students performed in ensembles. Once a month, there were mandatory exams and concerts. Professor Dumont proved to be a demanding teacher. He analyzed every phrase, every nuance of performance, forcing his students to think about music not only with their hands, but also with their heads. "Miss Wilson," he said during class, "you have excellent intuition, but that's not enough. You must understand the structure of the piece, the logic of the musical thought. Only then will your interpretation be convincing." He forced her to analyze each piece, identify keys, modulations, and form, and study the historical context. It was difficult work for a girl accustomed to playing more by instinct than by rules. But Charlotte worked hard. She practiced 10 to 12 hours a day, studied theory until late at night, listened to other students play, and attended concerts in Parisian halls. Gradually, her understanding of music deepened, and her technique improved. Chamber music lessons proved particularly helpful. Playing in an ensemble with other instruments, violin, cello, and brass, taught her to listen to her partners and adapt to the overall rhythm and dynamics. This developed her musical ear and sense of ensemble. Her piano duet partner was Jean-Paul Leroy, a talented young man with a gentle character and a romantic soul. They rehearsed together frequently, and gradually a friendship developed between them, which over time blossomed into something more. Jean-Paul was the complete opposite of the aristocratic Thomas Harrington. While Thomas was elegant and worldly, Jean-Paul was simple and sincere. The son of a village organist, he understood the value of hard work and wasn't afraid of menial tasks. "Charlotte," he said one day after a rehearsal, "you have an amazing gift. When you play, it seems as if the music is being born right now, rather than being performed from notes." They often strolled around Paris after classes, discussing music, art, and life. Jean-Paul showed her the city: Notre Dame, the Louvre, Montmartre with its artists and cafes. They listened to street musicians, attended cheap concerts, and ate lunch in student cafes. Gradually, Charlotte felt herself falling in love. Jean-Paul was kind and understanding. He shared her passion for music and supported her through difficult times. And there were many difficult times. The money Thomas had given her was quickly running out. Tuition, room, food, and sheet music, everything required resources she didn't have. She had to economize on everything, eating only bread and cheese, wearing the same dress, and foregoing the purchase of the sheet music she needed. Madame Morel, seeing her difficulties, sometimes waived the rent or treated her to an extra dinner. But Charlotte knew this couldn't go on for long. "I need a job," she said to Jean-Paul one day.
Otherwise, I won't be able to continue my studies."
"What work?" he asked in surprise. "We barely have time to study."
"Anything. Music lessons, playing in a cafe, whatever." Jean-Paul thought, "You know what? I have an idea. My friend Henri works at a restaurant in Montmartre. They sometimes need a pianist for evening performances. The pay isn't much, but it'll add a little something." So Charlotte began working as a pianist at the Golden Rooster restaurant in Montmartre. It wasn't the most respectable establishment. It was frequented by artists, writers, students, and bohemians of all stripes. But the atmosphere was vibrant and creative. The restaurant owner, Monsieur Lefebvre, was a colorful, plump man with a bushy mustache who loved music and treated his performers well. "Mademoiselle," he said after listening to Charlotte's playing, "you have golden fingers. But remember, we need light music here that won't interfere with conversation or appetite. Save the Chopin for the conservatory." Charlotte quickly adapted to the new demands. She played popular melodies, waltzes, light classical music, and sometimes accompanied singers. The work wasn't difficult, but it took up time that was already in short supply for her studies. Meanwhile, the first major exam was approaching at the conservatory. Students had to perform a program of 3 works from different eras before a panel of professors. For many, this was a decisive moment. Those who failed could be expelled. Charlotte chose a challenging program: a Bach prelude and fugue, a Mozart sonata, and a Chopin ballade. These were complex pieces requiring a high level of skill, but she wanted to showcase her full potential. Preparing for the exam was grueling. She practiced 14 hours a day, studying every note, every phrase. Jean-Paul helped her, listening to her playing and offering advice. "Your Chopin sounds wonderful," he said, "but in the Mozart sonata, you're too hasty. Mozart demands clarity and elegance, not passion." Professor Dumont also prepared it with particular care. "Miss Wilson, remember, it won't just be me at the exam, but other professors as well. Some of them are skeptical of international students. You must prove yourself worthy of studying here." The day of the exam arrived all too quickly. The conservatory's great hall was filled with students and faculty. 5 professors sat at the table, including the conservatory's director, Monsieur Ambroise. Charlotte was 7th on the list. She listened to the other students' performances, comparing them to her own. Marie Dubois played with skill but lacked soul. Carl Müller was precise but dull. Isabella Rossi shone with virtuosity, but her interpretation was superficial. When her name was announced, Charlotte's throat went dry. She walked up to the piano, bowed to the committee, and sat down at the instrument. She performed Bach's prelude and fugue first. She played with concentration, trying to capture every part of the fugue, every intonation. Her technique was impeccable. Every passage sounded pure and clear. Then came the Mozart sonata. Here, Charlotte tried to follow Jean-Paul's advice. She played elegantly and restrainedly, avoiding excessive emotion. The classical sonata form demanded precisely this approach. The final piece was a Chopin ballad. Here, Charlotte could showcase her full musicality and temperament. She played with fire, pouring into the music all the pain of separation from her homeland, all the joy of a dream come true, all her love for art. As the final chords faded, silence fell over the hall. The professors conferred in hushed voices, making notes in their notebooks. Finally, the director of the conservatory stood up. "Mademoiselle Wilson, your performance made a great impression on us.
Your musicality is undeniable. Your technique is excellent. And your interpretation is engaging. The committee has unanimously decided that you will be transferred to the second year." The hall erupted in applause. Charlotte barely held back tears of joy. She had done it. Her dream was continuing to come true. After the exam, her classmates surrounded her, congratulating her on her success. Jean-Paul hugged her and whispered,
"I always knew you could do it. You were amazing."
Professor Dumont also came up to congratulate. "Good, Miss Wilson, very good. But this is just the beginning. The program will be even more challenging in your second year." Charlotte nodded. She knew there were more challenges ahead, but now she felt capable of anything. That evening, the entire group, Jean-Paul and several other conservatory students, regulars, gathered at the Golden Rooster restaurant. Monsieur Lefebvre opened the finest champagne in honor of his pianist's success. "To Mademoiselle Charlotte," he proclaimed a toast. "To a talent that knows no bounds." Everyone drank and partied until late into the night. Charlotte played not for the crowd, but for her soul, her favorite tunes, improvisations, music that came from the heart. Jean-Paul sat next to the piano, and their eyes met as they played. In these moments, a special understanding arose between them, as if they were speaking a language understood only by the two of them. "Charlotte," he said as the celebrations began to die down, "I need to tell you something." They stepped out onto the restaurant's small balcony, overlooking Paris at night. The city lights twinkled below, and the air was filled with the scent of chestnut blossoms. "What did you mean?" Charlotte asked, feeling her heart begin to beat faster. Jean-Paul took her hands in his. I fell in love with you. I guess it happened from the first day we played a duet. You're not just a talented pianist. You're an amazing woman." Charlotte felt the color rise in her cheeks. "Jean-Paul, I know I have no right to feel this way," he continued. "We're both students. We have no money, no clear future. But I couldn't stay silent any longer." Charlotte looked up and into his sincere brown eyes. "Who said you don't have the right? I fell in love with you too." They kissed under the starry Parisian sky, and Charlotte felt like her happiness couldn't be more complete. The second year at the conservatory proved even more demanding. The program became more complex, with new subjects added: composition, conducting, and the study of various musical styles. Professor Dumont became even more critical of Charlotte's performance. "Miss Wilson," he would say during class, "you have talent, but that's not enough for a professional career. You must develop your own style, finding a unique interpretation of each piece." He forced her to study not only sheet music, but also the composers' biographies, the historical context of their creation, and various performance traditions. It was painstaking work, requiring not only time, but also a deep understanding of music. While studying, she continued working at the restaurant. Monsieur Lefebvre was pleased with his pianist. Customers often came specifically to hear her play. He even raised her salary and allowed her to occasionally perform more serious music. Her relationship with Jean-Paul developed slowly but surely. They spent almost all their free time together, rehearsing, strolling around Paris, discussing music and the future. Jean-Paul was gentle and caring, supporting Charlotte through all her difficulties and rejoicing in her successes. "You know," he said one day as they sat in a small cafe next to the conservatory, "I'm thinking about what I'll do after I finish my studies. I want to become a concert pianist. maybe even teach.
I don't know yet, Charlotte admitted. Sometimes I think I want to play on big stages. Sometimes I think happiness lies in simple music that touches people's hearts.
The main thing is that we will be together, Jean-Paul said, shaking her hand. But fate had prepared a test for them that they did not expect. At the beginning of the third semester, the conservatory welcomed a new teacher, Maestro Lorenzo Benedetti, the renowned Italian pianist and teacher. He arrived in Paris at the invitation of the conservatory's director to conduct master classes for the best students. Maestro Benedetti was a man of about 50, with noble gray hair and piercing dark eyes. His reputation was impeccable. A student of Liszt, he had performed throughout Europe and mentored several renowned pianists. Professor Dumont recommended Charlotte for participation in master classes.
Miss Wilson, this is a unique opportunity. Maestro Benedetti works only with the most talented students. His recommendation can open any door in the musical world.
The maestro's first lesson took place in the conservatory's large hall. Only 7 selected students, including Charlotte and Jean-Paul, were present. The maestro listened to each student's performance, making comments and offering advice. When it was Charlotte's turn, she performed Chopin's Etude, one of the most difficult in his work. She played superbly, with technical brilliance and musical depth. Maestro Benedetti listened in silence, nodding only occasionally. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment, then walked over to the piano. "Signorina," he said with a slight Italian accent, "you have a rare gift. Not just technique, although that is excellent. You have what the Italians call anima, the soul of music." He sat down at the piano and played the same etude, but his performance was completely different, more mature, deeper, full of nuances that Charlotte hadn't even noticed in the notes. "See the difference?" he asked. "You play with your heart, and that's wonderful. But a professional musician must play with his mind, too. Every note must be justified, every phrase thought out." After the lesson, the maestro asked Charlotte to stay. "Signorina Wilson," he said, "I'd like to work with you individually. You have the potential for a great career, but it needs to be nurtured properly." Charlotte's heart started beating faster. "It's a great honor, maestro, but I don't know if I can afford it." "Don't worry about the money." Benedetti waved his hand. "I'm interested in working with real talent. This is my payment to music for everything it's given me." Thus began private lessons with Maestro Benedetti. Twice a week, Charlotte came to his hotel, where he had a beautiful concert grand piano brought especially for the lessons. The maestro was a demanding but fair teacher. He forced her to reconsider everything she knew about music, to seek new colors in each piece, and to develop her technique to perfection. "Signorina," he said, "there are many good pianists in the world, but the great ones are those who find their own voice. You must not just play music, you must tell stories." Under his guidance, Charlotte's performance changed dramatically. It became more refined, profound, and professional. Even Professor Dumont noticed these changes. "Miss Wilson, you are making amazing progress," he said after one of the lessons. "Working with Maestro Benedetti is doing you good." But there were problems, too. Lessons with the maestro took up a lot of time, which was already in short supply. Charlotte had to cut back on her time with Jean-Paul and skip some classes at the conservatory. Jean-Paul was initially understanding. Of course, you should take advantage of this opportunity. Maestro Benedetti is a legend. But gradually his patience began to wear thin. They saw each other less and less, talked less and less about anything but music. Charlotte was completely absorbed in her studies and didn't notice how she was drifting away from her beloved. Everything changed one April evening when Maestro Benedetti made Charlotte an unexpected proposal. "Signorina," he said after a particularly intense lesson, "I'm returning to Italy in a month, and I'd like to invite you to come with me." Charlotte looked up in surprise.
To Italy?
"Yes, I have a house near Florence, with a beautiful piano and perfect acoustics. We could continue our lessons there. And then, Italy has many opportunities for talented young musicians. Concerts, competitions, meeting the right people."
But my studies at the conservatory.
"Signorina," the maestro interrupted, "the conservatory will give you a diploma, but a real career isn't built on diplomas, but on connections and reputation. I can give you both." He came closer, and Charlotte could smell his expensive cologne. "Think about it. You have a week to think about it." Charlotte left the hotel in utter dismay. The maestro's offer opened up fantastic opportunities for her. Italy was the cradle of European music, and there she could meet the continent's finest musicians and perform in historic theaters and halls. But something about the maestro's proposal made her uneasy. She recalled a similar situation with Mr. Pemberton and felt uneasy. Could there be a catch here, too? She decided to consult with Jean-Paul. They met at their favorite café near the conservatory, but the conversation didn't go as she expected. "You want to go to Italy?" Jean-Paul didn't hide his surprise and pain.
With Maestro Benedetti? It's just an opportunity to continue my education.
"Charlotte," Jean-Paul interrupted, "you do realize he's offering more than just music lessons. Men in his position don't make such offers out of pure altruism."
He's a famous teacher. Many students dream of studying with him.
"Yes, but not in his private home, away from everyone. Charlotte, open your eyes. He's in love with you. And his proposal isn't about music. It's about a completely different relationship." Charlotte felt her cheeks heat up.
You have no right to say that. The maestro is a respected man.
"He's a man," Jean-Paul said firmly, "and very experienced. He knows how to manipulate young, talented girls by promising them a career." They had their first argument since they'd met. Charlotte left the café in tears, and Jean-Paul was left sitting alone, staring gloomily into his cup of coffee. The following days were agonizing. Charlotte vacillated between doubts and hopes. On the one hand, she realized Jean-Paul might be right. On the other, the maestro's proposal truly opened up brilliant prospects. She tried to talk to Professor Dumont, but he was vaguely polite. "The decision is yours, Miss Wilson. Both Maestro Benedetti and the conservatory can give you a lot. The choice depends on what you want from life." The uncertainty continued until Charlotte witnessed a conversation that cleared everything up. She arrived at the hotel for a lesson with the maestro, but the door to his room was ajar. Voices could be heard inside. The maestro was speaking to someone in Italian. Charlotte knew the language well enough to understand the conversation. "Yes, she is very talented," the maestro said, "and very beautiful. The perfect combination for my plans." "What if she refuses?" asked an unfamiliar male voice.
She won't refuse. I know girls like that well. Ambitious, willing to do anything for their careers.
A few months in my house, and she'll understand what her options are.
And then what? You're not planning to marry an English servant, are you?
The maestro laughed. Of course not. But a year or two of pleasant company, and then we'll find her a place in some provincial theater. Everyone will be happy. Charlotte quietly backed away from the door, feeling her insides turn cold. So Jean-Paul was right. The maestro didn't see her as a student, but just another mistress, to be used and then discarded. She didn't go to class, but returned to Madame Morel and spent the entire evening in her room, pondering what she'd heard. For the second time, life had confronted her with a choice between the dubious patronage of an influential man and an uncertain but honest path. The next day she came to the maestro with a firm decision.
Signor Benedetti, I'm grateful for the offer, but I must decline. I want to finish the conservatory.
The maestro's face darkened. Signorina, you're making a mistake. Opportunities like these don't come around again.
Perhaps, but I'd rather be wrong than regret my choice.
The maestro shrugged. As you wish, but don't count on my support anymore.
I understand,
Charlotte said calmly. Leaving the hotel, she felt relieved. Yes, she had lost the opportunity for a fast-track career, but she retained her dignity and the right to make her own decisions. Now it was necessary to make peace with Jean-Paul. She found him at the conservatory, where he was rehearsing a Beethoven sonata. The music sounded both sad and passionate, reflecting the performer's state of mind.
Jean-Paul,
she called softly when he finished. He turned around, and she saw pain and hope in his eyes.
Charlotte. You were right, she said, coming closer. The maestro offered more than just music lessons.
I refused. Jean-Paul stood up and hugged her.
I was so afraid of losing you. Forgive me for my harsh words. You wanted to protect me, and I'm grateful for that.
They reconciled, and their relationship became even stronger than before. Jean-Paul helped Charlotte catch up on her studies and supported her morally when other professors became less enthusiastic about her after she rejected the maestro's offer. But Charlotte didn't lose heart. She continued to study hard, perfecting her skills and preparing for her final exams. She also continued working at the restaurant. She still needed the money. An unexpected opportunity presented itself in the spring, shortly before graduating from the conservatory. Monsieur Lefebvre once approached Charlotte after her performance in a restaurant. Mademoiselle, I have an interesting proposition for you. My friend, Monsieur Durand, owns a concert agency. He's looking for talented young musicians to perform in private homes and small halls. Would you like to introduce me? Charlotte agreed without hesitation. The meeting with Monsieur Durand took place the following week. He was an energetic man of about 40, with lively eyes and a quick voice. Mademoiselle Wilson, he said after listening to her performance, you have an interesting repertoire and a good stage presence. I could offer you a few performances. The fees won't be high at first, but if the public likes it... The first concert took place in the salon of Madame de Montmorency, a wealthy widow who hosted musical evenings for the Parisian intelligentsia. Charlotte was no less nervous than she had been during her conservatory exams. Madame de Montmorency's salon was furnished with exquisite taste. Antique furniture, paintings by old masters, fresh flowers in expensive vases. The guests, writers, artists, musicians, and members of the aristocracy, were seated in armchairs around the piano. Charlotte performed a program of works by Chopin, Liszt, and Debussy. She played with all her heart, forgetting her nerves, completely surrendering herself to the music. The audience listened with bated breath, and warm applause followed each piece. "Magnificent!" exclaimed Madame de Montmorency after the concert.
Mademoiselle, you must definitely perform at my next soirée.
Charlotte's success inspired her. Monsieur Durand was pleased and offered her several more performances. Gradually, she began to gain a reputation in Parisian musical circles. Meanwhile, final exams at the conservatory were approaching. This was the most serious test of all their years of study. Students had to perform a half-hour program before a committee of leading musicians and teachers. Charlotte chose a bold program, including works from different eras and styles. A Bach prelude and fugue, a Beethoven sonata, a Chopin nocturne and ballade, and decided to conclude with her own improvisation on the theme of a Russian folk song in memory of her roots. The preparations were grueling. Charlotte practiced 16 hours a day, perfecting each piece. Jean-Paul assisted her, listening to rehearsals and offering advice. "Your program is very difficult," he said, "but if you perform it well, you will create a real sensation." The exam day arrived on a sunny May morning. The conservatory's large concert hall was full. In addition to the committee members, there were faculty, junior students, parents, and friends of the graduates. Charlotte performed midway through the program. She wore her best dress, dark blue, simple yet elegant. She wore her hair in a neat bun so nothing would distract from the music. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage and bowed to the audience. Jean-Paul was also sitting in the audience, smiling encouragingly. Her heart was pounding so hard she was afraid everyone would hear. But as soon as she touched the keys, her nervousness subsided. Bach's prelude began, and Charlotte became completely immersed in the music. Every note was measured, every phrase carefully considered. The fugue developed logically and harmoniously, the voices intertwining in a complex contrapuntal pattern. Then came Beethoven's sonata. It was a work from the composer's mature period, full of philosophical depth and dramatic contrasts. Charlotte played with fire and passion, but never lost control of form and structure. Chopin's nocturne allowed her to showcase her lyrical side. The melody flowed softly and soulfully. The embellishments sounded natural, without disrupting the overall mood of the piece. The same composer's ballad was full of drama and virtuosity. Charlotte performed it brilliantly, demonstrating both technical mastery and a profound understanding of the music. But the most moving moment was the final improvisation. Charlotte took the melody of a Russian song her mother sang and developed it in free form, adding harmonic colors and rhythmic variations, moving from lyrical episodes to dramatic climaxes. The music told a story, the story of a girl who left her home in search of a dream, endured trials, and found her path in art. The final chords echoed homesickness, the joy of creativity, and hope for the future. When the music ended, the hall fell silent. Then the audience erupted in applause. People stood up, shouting, "Bravo!" and some cried. No student in the conservatory's history had ever received such a reception. The chairman of the commission, the renowned pianist and teacher Monsieur Sanson, stood up and applauded at length. Then he approached the microphone. "Mademoiselle Wilson, your performance was exceptional. The committee unanimously awards you the highest mark and recommends you for the conservatory's gold medal."
Charlotte could barely hold back tears of joy. She'd done it. Her dream had come true. She'd become a professional pianist, received the best musical education in Europe, and proven to everyone, and especially to herself, that she could achieve success through honest means. After the ceremony, she was surrounded by congratulators. Professor Dumont, who had once welcomed the timid girl from the English provinces, now proudly introduced her to his colleagues. "Allow me to introduce Mademoiselle Charlotte Wilson, one of my most talented students. I'm sure we'll hear more about her successes." Jean-Paul hugged her and whispered, "I'm so proud of you. You were amazing." Monsieur Durand, who was present at the exam, approached with a business proposal. "Mademoiselle, after such success, I can offer you several serious contracts. There are requests for performances in London, Vienna, even St. Petersburg." Charlotte listened to the proposals, but her mind was elsewhere. Success had been achieved, but what next? What kind of life did she want to build? The answer came unexpectedly when she received a letter from England. It was written by Madame Hartwell, the Pemberton housekeeper. "Dear Charlotte, I hope this letter finds you in good health and well-being. I have news that may interest you. Mr. Pemberton has married a young lady from an aristocratic family, and they have moved to London. The country house has been sold to the new owners, Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald, a young couple with 3 children. The new owners are looking for a governess for their children who can teach them music. When I mentioned you, they were very interested. Mr. Fitzgerald is an amateur musician himself and understands the value of a good musical education. If you're interested in this offer, write to me. The terms are very favorable, and you could return to familiar places, but in a completely different capacity." Charlotte held the letter in her hands for a long time, considering the offer. Return to England? To the land she'd left 3 years earlier as a poor servant? Now she was a qualified pianist, with concert offers all over Europe. But there was something appealing about the thought of returning home, working with children, and being able to pass on my love of music to a new generation. She showed the letter to Jean-Paul. He read it and thought, "An interesting offer, but didn't you want to become a concert pianist?" "I wanted to, and I still do. But, maybe there are different ways to serve music, not necessarily only from big stages." They talked about it for a long time, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, Jean-Paul said, "What if we go there together?" Charlotte looked at him in surprise. "Together? I mean, as husband and wife?" "Charlotte, I've been wanting to propose to you for a long time, but I've been hesitant. We have no money, no future, but if there's a good job opportunity—" He dropped to one knee right in Madame Morel's small room. "Charlotte Wilson, will you marry me?" Tears of joy sparkled in her eyes. "Yes, Jean-Paul, yes!" The wedding took place in a small church next to the conservatory. Only close friends, classmates, Madame Morel, Monsieur Lefebvre, and Professor Dumont were present. The ceremony was modest but sincere. After their honeymoon in Provence, the young couple headed to England. The trip was full of memories for Charlotte. She returned along the same route she had taken 3 years earlier, but how everything had changed. The Fitzgeralds' home greeted them with warmth and comfort. The hosts turned out to be a young couple in their 30s, he a lawyer with a passion for music, she the daughter of a wealthy merchant, an educated and kind woman. "Mrs. Leroy," said Mrs. Fitzgerald, We are so glad that you have agreed to work for us. Our children, James, Elizabeth, and little Thomas, are in great need of a good musical education." The children were 8, 6, and 4 years old. All three showed musical talent, and Charlotte happily took on their tuition. Jean-Paul also found a job, giving private piano lessons to children from nearby families and assisting with the local choir. Life in the English countryside proved peaceful and happy. Charlotte had the opportunity to pursue her passion, music, but now she not only performed, but also passed on her knowledge to her children. This brought her particular satisfaction. In the evenings, the couple often performed duets for the Fitzgerald family and their guests. Their performances were popular in the area, and they were sometimes invited to charity concerts in neighboring towns. A year passed. Charlotte was expecting her first child, continuing to work and enjoying life. It seemed like everything was going perfectly. But fate had another test in store for her, and this time a happy one. The Fitzgerald's house once received a visitor from London, Mr. Edward Gilbert, owner of a booking agency and impresario for many famous musicians. He was a friend of Mr. Fitzgerald's and was staying for a few days on his way to Scotland. At dinner, the conversation turned to music, and Mr. Fitzgerald proudly spoke of his governess's talents. "Really?" Mr. Gilbert asked with interest. "Couldn't we listen?" After dinner, Charlotte and Jean-Paul performed several pieces. They played with inspiration, with the ease and understanding that only comes to couples who have worked together for a long time. Mr. Gilbert listened attentively, nodding occasionally. When the music ended, he was silent for a long time, then approached Charlotte. "Mrs. Leroy, may I ask where you studied?" "At the Paris Conservatory, sir, with Professor Dumont." "Ah, I see. That explains a lot. Tell me, have you considered the possibility of a concert career?" Charlotte exchanged glances with her husband. "I considered it once, but life turned out differently." "I understand, but talent of this level. Let me make you an offer. Next month, there will be a charity concert in London for children's shelters. I need performers, preferably married couples, to emphasize the family theme of the event. Would you be willing to perform?" Charlotte's heart started beating faster. London! The concert hall! What she'd once dreamed of. "We need to consult," said Jean-Paul. "Of course. Here's my card. If you decide to participate, write to me within a week." The couple discussed the proposal all night. On the one hand, it was an opportunity to return to the concert stage and showcase themselves to London audiences. On the other, Charlotte was expecting a child and working with the Fitzgerald children. "What does your heart say?" Jean-Paul asked. Charlotte thought, 3 years ago I would have agreed without hesitation. But now I understand that happiness isn't only found on the big stage. I'm happy here, with you, with our students, with our future child." "But that doesn't mean we should give up all opportunities," Jean-Paul said softly. "One concert won't change our lives radically." In the end, they decided to accept. Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald were understanding and even suggested going to London together. They wanted to see the theaters and exhibitions. The concert took place at St. James's Hall, one of London's most prestigious. The program was varied, featuring singers, instrumentalists, and a small orchestra. Charlotte and Jean-Paul were scheduled to perform a piano duet, Mozart's Concerto for Two Pianos. Behind the scenes,
Charlotte was no less nervous than she had been during her conservatory exams. More than a year had passed since her last major performance, and her pregnancy was taking its toll. "Everything will be fine," Jean-Paul reassured her. "We've played this concerto so many times." When their number was announced, the couple took to the stage to thunderous applause. The hall was packed with members of the aristocracy, artists, patrons, and journalists. The first chord sounded a little hesitant, but gradually the musicians found their rhythm. Mozart flowed easily and gracefully, the two pianos conversing, complementing each other, creating a wondrous harmony of sounds. Charlotte played with her eyes closed, completely surrendering to the music. She felt the hall fall silent, people forgetting their worries and immersing themselves in a world of pure art. The final chord sounded triumphant. The hall erupted in applause. People jumped to their feet, shouting, "Bravo!" Charlotte and Jean-Paul bowed, holding hands, happy and excited. "Encore! Encore!" the crowd shouted. For an encore, they performed a light piece by Schubert, and the audience was delighted again. After the concert, Mr. Gilbert approached them.
Excellent. Simply excellent. I have some suggestions for you.
But Charlotte interrupted him gently.
"Mr. Gilbert, we are very grateful for the opportunity to speak, but our life is in the provinces with our students."
"But your talent—"
"My talent will find application there too. Perhaps nurturing young musicians is no less important than performing live."
Mr. Gilbert shook his head, but smiled.
"Well, it's your decision. But know this, the doors of London's halls are always open to you."
The return to the province was triumphant. Local newspapers wrote about the performance of our talented musicians, and the Fitzgerald children greeted them as heroes.
"Mrs. Leroy," said little Elizabeth, "when I grow up, I want to play like you."
"You'll definitely learn, my dear," Charlotte smiled. "Music is open to everyone who truly loves it." A few more months passed. A son was born, a healthy, strong boy named Charles, after his grandfather. Charlotte temporarily left teaching to devote herself to motherhood, but music never left the house. She sang lullabies, played light melodies, and Jean-Paul accompanied her on the piano. The Fitzgerald children weren't forgotten either. As soon as Charlotte felt strong enough, she resumed her lessons. James, the eldest, showed a special talent. He not only played the piano well, but also began composing his own melodies.
"He has a real talent as a composer," Charlotte told her husband. "Perhaps he should consider a serious musical education?"
Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald heeded their governess's advice. When James turned 12, he was sent to London to study at the music school at St. Paul's Cathedral.
"It's all thanks to you," Mrs. Fitzgerald said to Charlotte. "Without you, we wouldn't have noticed his abilities."
5 years passed. Little Charles grew up and also began to show an interest in music. He could spend hours listening to his parents play, trying to press the piano keys and humming the melodies he heard. Charlotte was already 28. She had become a mature woman, an experienced teacher, a loving mother, and a wife. Her concert career was a thing of the past, but her life was full of meaning and joy. Sometimes in the evenings, when the house was quiet, she would sit at the piano and play for herself, the same pieces she once performed on stage. The music still sounded beautiful, but now it contained not only technical skill, but also life experience, the depth of emotion of a mature woman. "What are you thinking about?" Jean-Paul asked, coming up and hugging her.
"About how it all worked out," she replied. "Remember how we dreamed of concert halls, fame, applause?"
"I remember. So what? Do you regret it?" Charlotte looked out the window where the apple orchard was in bloom, listened to the quiet breathing of her sleeping son in the next room, and felt the warmth of a man's hands.
No, I don't regret it. We found our happiness, and our music is needed by people. Maybe not by the thousands in concert halls, but by those around us. Isn't that wonderful?
Jean-Paul kissed her on the cheek. Wonderful. And you know what? I think we're just getting started. There are still so many years ahead, so much music, so many students.
And another baby,
Charlotte added quietly, smiling. Jean-Paul looked at her in surprise. Is it true?
It's true. Charles will have a little brother or sister in the spring.
They embraced, happy and full of plans for the future. Outside, the apple tree branches swayed in the moonlight, and somewhere in the house, a clock ticked quietly, counting down the minutes of their happy, musical life. The years passed. The Leroy family prospered. They had 2 more children, a daughter, Marie, and a son, Pierre. All the children inherited their parents' musical talent and learned to play various instruments from an early age. Charlotte became a renowned teacher in the area. Children from the most distinguished families came to study with her. Her methods combined rigorous technical training with the development of musicality and creative thinking. Jean-Paul organized a local choir and orchestra, which performed concerts in the church and at festive events. Their joint performances became a tradition. Once a year, the Leroys organized a charity concert, the proceeds of which went to help needy families. The Fitzgerald House became the center of the neighborhood's musical life. Art lovers gathered there, and salon concerts and musical evenings were held. The atmosphere was warm and friendly, far from the stiffness of aristocratic salons. The eldest son, James Fitzgerald, received an excellent musical education in London and became a composer. His first works were performed in the capital's theaters, and critics noted the influence of the school he received as a child at Madame Leroy's. Little Elizabeth also grew up to be a talented pianist, though she chose family life over the stage. She married a young doctor and moved to a neighboring town, but often visited her former governess for advice on raising her own children. Thomas Fitzgerald, the youngest of the children, became a violinist and went to study music in Vienna. His letters made it clear that his European musical education was no better than what he had received in his parents' home.
You see,
Charlotte said to her husband, reading another letter from Thomas,
we didn't choose teaching for nothing.
Our students are scattered all over the world, but the music we gave them lives on in their hearts. Charlotte and Jean-Paul's own children also grew up surrounded by music. Charles, the eldest son, showed a talent for conducting. He would spend hours listening to orchestral recordings and attempting to direct an imaginary orchestra. Marie possessed a beautiful voice and dreamed of becoming a singer. Pierre, the youngest, amazed everyone with his talent for composition. At the age of 8, he was already composing simple yet expressive melodies. From time to time, Charlotte received letters from Paris. Professor Dumont wrote about life at the conservatory, the successes of former students, and changes in the musical life of Europe. Madame Morel reported news about her guests, and Monsieur Lefebvre invited her to come and perform at his restaurant for old times. There was also a letter that particularly moved Charlotte. It was from Thomas Harrington, the same young man who had once helped her get into the conservatory. He was now a successful composer. His operas were being performed in London theaters, and his symphonies were performed by the finest orchestras in Europe. Dear Charlotte, he wrote, I often think about the day I first heard you play at my uncle's house. I knew then that I had encountered a true talent. Time has shown that I was not mistaken. I recently learned about your teaching career from mutual friends. I admire your choice. Nurturing young musicians is no less important than performing live. Maybe even more so. I have a proposal. Next year, a new conservatory is planned to open in London, a private educational institution for gifted children from various social backgrounds. The Board of Trustees is looking for experienced teachers, and I immediately thought of you. This would be a wonderful opportunity to share my experience with a large number of students and help shape a new generation of musicians. The salary is more than competitive, and the working conditions are ideal. If you're interested in this offer, please write to me. I'd be happy to meet with you again to discuss the details. With unwavering respect and admiration, Thomas Harrington. Charlotte reread the letter several times, feeling mixed emotions. On the one hand, the offer was tempting. Work in London, the opportunity to influence the development of music education, and a reunion with old friends. On the other hand, it meant a dramatic change for the entire family. "What's Thomas writing there?" Jean-Paul asked, noticing her thoughtfulness. Charlotte showed him the letter. Her husband read it carefully and thought for a long time. "An interesting offer," he said finally, "and very flattering." Thomas has always had a knack for appreciating talent.
But that would mean moving to London, Charlotte said. The children, our students, our whole lives.
On the other hand, Jean-Paul countered softly, our children are growing up. Charles is already 15, and he'll soon need a serious musical education. There are more opportunities in London. They discussed the proposal for several days, weighing all the arguments. The Fitzgerald family viewed the governess's possible departure with understanding, albeit regret. "Mrs. Leroy," said Mr. Fitzgerald, "you have given our children more than we could have ever dreamed of. If you have the opportunity to share your knowledge with even more children, you should do so." The decision wasn't easy, but the Leroy family eventually decided to accept Thomas's offer. They moved to London the following summer. The new conservatory was housed in a beautiful building in Bloomsbury. It was the former mansion of a wealthy merchant, specially converted for music lessons. The spacious, high-ceilinged rooms boasted excellent acoustics, and each contained a high-quality instrument. The new conservatory's philosophy differed from traditional educational institutions. It accepted children regardless of social background. The main criteria were talent and a desire to learn. A scholarship program allowed children from less affluent families to study. Charlotte took charge of a piano class for younger students. Her group included 12 children aged 8 to 14. The children of aristocrats and artisans, orphans from orphanages, and the offspring of wealthy merchants. They were all united by a love of music and a desire to learn. Among her students was 10-year-old Margaret O'Connor, the daughter of an Irish dock worker who possessed a phenomenal ear. 12-year-old Henry Aston, the son of a lord, compensated for his lack of natural talent with incredible hard work. 8-year-old David Cohen, the son of an East End tailor, amazed everyone with his improvisations.
Every child is unique,
Charlotte said at teaching conferences.
You can't teach everyone using the same method.
Some need strictness, some need encouragement, and some need more creative freedom. Her approach quickly yielded results. Charlotte's students demonstrated remarkable progress, not only in technique, but also in musical development. Their performances at school concerts became highlights of London's musical life. Jean-Paul also found his place at the new conservatory. He taught chamber music and directed the school choir. His cheerfulness and teaching talent quickly made him a favorite among the students. The Leroy's own children also studied at the conservatory. Charles studied conducting seriously under the renowned Maestro Williams. Marie developed her vocal talent in the class of Signora Rossini, a former opera singer. Pierre, the youngest, enrolled in the composition class of Thomas Harrington himself. "Your youngest son is a true talent," Thomas told Charlotte. "He has an unusually developed sense of harmony and a fresh melodic gift. I think he will become a wonderful composer." Life in London was intense and full. Charlotte taught, participated in conservatory concerts, and wrote teaching materials. In the evenings, she and Jean-Paul often visited theaters and concert halls. This was part of their professional development. 3 years passed. The conservatory had earned an excellent reputation, and its graduates were accepted to the best music schools in Europe. Charlotte became one of London's most respected teachers. But the most significant event was her meeting with a man from the past. It happened at a charity concert at the Royal Albert Hall. Charlotte was performing Bach's Concerto for 4 pianos with a group of her students. The performance was brilliant, and afterward, an elegant, gray-haired gentleman approached her. "Madame Leroy?" he said uncertainly. Charlotte turned and recognized Lord James Ashton, the same aristocrat who had once attended her first performance at the Pemberton House. "Lord Ashton," she nodded politely. "I wasn't mistaken," he exclaimed, "although you've changed a lot. For the better, of course. Do you remember me?" "Of course I remember. You were among Mr. Pemberton's guests." Lord Ashton was embarrassed. "Yes, back then we weren't very warm to your performance. I hope you've forgiven us for our arrogance?" "Forgive what?" Charlotte smiled. "It's all in the past." "I've followed your career," the Lord continued. "I've heard of your successes in Paris, in the provinces, and now here. You've proven that talent truly knows no social boundaries." They talked for a few more minutes. Lord Ashton explained that he had become a trustee of several musical institutions and actively supported young talent. "You know," he said as they parted, "that evening at Pemberton's changed a lot in me. Your performance forced me to reconsider many of my views. Now I understand that true aristocracy is an aristocracy of spirit, not blood." After his departure, Charlotte stood for a long time in the foyer of the concert hall, processing what had happened. What a long journey she had come, from a timid servant to a respected teacher, and how not only she herself had changed, but also society's attitude toward people like her. A surprise awaited her at home. Charles, her eldest son, received an invitation to intern at the Vienna Philharmonic with the renowned conductor Gustav Mahler. Marie was offered a role in a new opera scheduled for production at Covent Garden. And Pierre won a competition for young composers, and his symphony was scheduled to be performed at a contemporary music festival. "You see," Jean-Paul said, hugging his wife, "our children have surpassed us. Isn't that what all parents want?" "They do," Charlotte agreed. "But you know what makes me happiest? Not their successes, although that's important, but the fact that they've remained good people, that music hasn't made them arrogant or cruel." Indeed, all 3 children grew up kind and compassionate. Charles often organized free concerts for children from poor neighborhoods. Marie participated in charity performances. Pierre composed music for school festivals and children's theaters. "It's all your fault," Thomas Harrington once said. "You've raised not only talented musicians, but good people." Several more years passed. Charlotte turned 40. She was in the prime of life, full of plans and ideas. Her teaching methods were published and used in music schools across Europe. Her students won prizes at international competitions. The conservatory was expanding, opening new departments. Charlotte was invited to head the entire piano department, and she happily accepted. One autumn day, a young girl of about 17 knocked on her office door. She was modestly dressed and timid, but a familiar twinkle blazed in her eyes.
Madame Leroy,
she said with a slight accent.
My name is Anna Petrova. I come from Russia and would like to study with you.
Charlotte invited her to sit down and listened attentively to the girl's story. Anna was the daughter of a village schoolteacher from near Moscow, self-taught like Charlotte herself. She sold the family's last valuables to get to London and receive a proper musical education. "Play something," Charlotte asked. Anna sat down at the piano and performed Chopin's Nocturne, the very one that had once begun Charlotte's story. She played with soul, even though her technique was still imperfect.
You have the most important thing,
Charlotte said when the music ended.
You have something that can't be learned, a love of music. We'll make up for the rest. Welcome to the conservatory, Miss Petrova.
The girl's eyes filled with tears of gratitude.
Thank you. I won't let you down. I know, Charlotte smiled. I was in your place once too.
That evening at home, she told Jean-Paul about the new student.
You know, looking at her, I remembered myself 20 years ago. Just as timid, just as full of hopes and fears.
And look what you've accomplished, said the husband. Perhaps this girl will follow a similar path.
Maybe. The main thing is to give her a chance, and what she does with it is entirely up to her.
Years passed. Anna Petrova did indeed become one of Charlotte's best students, and later a successful pianist. She often said that she owed all her success to her teacher, who believed in her. But for Charlotte, this was just one of many stories. Over the years of teaching, hundreds of students passed through her hands. Some achieved great heights, some remained amateurs, and some abandoned music altogether. But each one took with them a piece of the love for art that she strove to impart.
Madame Leroy, one of her colleagues once said, you have transformed music education in our country. Your methods are used everywhere. Your students perform in concert halls all over the world. You know what I think? Charlotte replied. Music is a river that flows through centuries, through generations. We are all just drops in this river. My goal wasn't to become a great pianist, but to help this river flow further through the hearts of my students. On her 50th birthday, Charlotte received an unexpected gift. All of her students, both current and former, organized a concert in her honor. Musicians from all over the world who had once studied with her gathered at the Royal Albert Hall. The program consisted of pieces she particularly loved to teach. Each performer played something unique, but together they created a remarkable picture, a musical story of their teacher's life. At the concert's finale, Charlotte herself took the stage. She sat at the piano and performed the very same improvisation on a Russian folk song that she once performed during her final exam at the Paris Conservatory. The music was warm and soulful, telling the story of the long journey from a small town in Yorkshire to a concert hall in central London. It contained homesickness, the joy of motherhood, and the satisfaction of a life well lived. As the final chords faded, the audience rose to their feet
and applauded for several minutes. Charlotte sat at the piano, looking out at the room full of people whose lives she had touched in one way or another with her art.
Thank you,
She said as the applause died down.
thank you for this wonderful gift. But do you know what the greatest reward is for me? Not the applause, not the recognition. It's that moment when a child's eyes sparkle with an understanding of music, when they suddenly hear not just sounds, but the living voice of the soul. That's what makes life and work worth living for.
Following the concert, a reception was held, attended by Charlotte's friends and colleagues from around the world. Professor Dumont, now very elderly, flew in from Paris specifically for the concert. Thomas Harrington, who became one of Europe's leading composers, gave a speech about Charlotte's importance to the development of music education. "Dear friends," he said, "today we honor not just a talented teacher, we honor a woman who proved that true aristocracy is an aristocracy of the soul, who demonstrated that talent and hard work can overcome any obstacle, who dedicated her life not to personal glory, but to serving art." Charlotte listened to these words, thinking about the years she had lived. Yes, she could have become a famous concert pianist. Her name could have stood alongside those of great virtuosos. But she chose a different path, that of a teacher, a mentor, someone who helps others find their way in music. And she regretted nothing. Her children grew up to be wonderful people and talented musicians. Her students scattered across the world, carrying a piece of her soul within them. Her methods helped thousands of children connect with beauty. "What are you thinking about?" Jean-Paul asked, approaching her that evening after the guests had left. "About how strange life works," she replied. "When I was young, I thought happiness was fame, applause, recognition. But it turns out, happiness is the opportunity to do what you love, with the people you love." They stepped out onto the balcony of their Kensington home. The lights of London glowed below. Music played somewhere, and ordinary human life went on. "You know," Charlotte said, "sometimes I think I can hear it. The music that resounds in the hearts of all my students. Wherever they are, whatever they do, that music continues to resound. And that's the best reward imaginable." Jean-Paul hugged her. "You are an amazing woman, and I'm happy to have walked this entire path by your side." "The journey isn't over yet," Charlotte smiled. "Tomorrow, new students will arrive. There will be new discoveries, new joys and challenges. And I'm ready for all of it." They stood, embracing, looking out at the city at night. And somewhere in the world, music played, the music to which Charlotte had dedicated her life. And this music will forever be heard, passed from teacher to student, from heart to heart, uniting people in a single striving for beauty. And at that moment, when Charlotte's fingers touched the keys of that piano in Mr. Pemberton's distant past, a story began that would change not only her life, but the lives of hundreds of others. A story about how talent and perseverance can overcome any obstacle, that music truly knows no social boundaries, and that the greatest happiness is the opportunity to share your gift with others. If you liked this story, please leave your thoughts in the comments and give the video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. See you next time.